Hey guys, Mike here. So, over the years, we've done a lot of videos at Envy, and we've gone through a decent amount of camera lenses. Some great, and some not so great, but after all these years, I think we finally have a pretty solid set of lenses that we can use for pretty much any filming situation, and I'm gonna show them here to you today. Now, as I've said, we've accrued these from years of trying different lenses. Although these are all Canon lenses, we also tried others in the past and just kept coming back to Canon. Thankfully, we know that there are a lot of people that still use speed boosters and adapters for non-Canon cameras in order to use Canon lenses. So let's jump right into it. The first one I want to show you is the cheapest lens out of all the ones in our kit, and that is the Canon 50mm f1.8, or as a lot of people know it as the Nifty 50. Now this is definitely a lens that everybody should have in their kit, regardless if you're just a beginning filmmaker or if you're working in a production studio environment like us. It's a really sharp lens and you get a great depth of field with it. But the biggest downside to this lens is that it doesn't have any image stabilization. For the kind of commercials we produce, we're always on the move and we usually don't have time to rig up our cameras. So we normally rely on a mix of our lens's image stabilization along with maybe some help from our editing software to get the best smooth results. So for this lens, we normally use it for photos or when we can have it on a tripod. Otherwise, it gets way too shaky. It's also a 50mm lens, so we can't really use it in very tight spaces, and we need some room between the camera and the subject to get the best shot. But the one thing you have to take in consideration is the price for what you're getting. At the time of this video, this lens costs a little bit over $100, which is such a great value for the image quality that you get. Okay, so moving on to our next lens, which is our widest lens of the bunch, and that's our Canon 10 to 18mm f4.5 to 5.6. So with this lens, I'll be honest, you really won't get any bokeh or blur in the background. But you'll be able to shoot in really tight spaces that you may not be able to get with other lenses or even some cameras. Before we got this lens, anytime we needed to film somewhere tight, like a car or a bathroom, we usually used our smartphone, since phones like the iPhone usually have a pretty decent wide-angle lens. So with this lens, you can use it on your good camera while still fitting into tight spaces. Plus, this lens comes with image stabilization, and since it's so wide, you can get really great stylistic and smooth shots with it. You can usually pick up this lens for around $300, but I've seen it used for around $200. Okay, on to our next lens. So now we're going to be getting into a little bit higher priced lenses, but still sub $1,000 lenses, but they're definitely worth it. This is our Canon 35mm f2 lens. Now this is our newest lens in our kit, and I don't mean that it's newest as in it was the latest to be released, I mean it's the newest to us. Now we were kind of strong-armed into getting this lens when we bought our C200, and I'll explain why. We used to have a Tamron 35mm f1.8, which we loved, but when we got our C200, Tamron told us that the lens wasn't compatible with the C200, and eventually we just had to sell it and look for a new option. We really loved our Tamron lens, but we're really happy with this lens so far, and when we were looking for a new 35mm lens, we did have a few requirements. First of all, we wanted a 35mm lens so that we could get a nice natural look with our videos, plus it's wide enough so that we don't have to have a lot of room between us and our actors. The other thing is it needed to have image stabilization. Now, like I said before, this is really important to us, and that's one of the reasons we don't use the 50mm lens a lot, because we normally don't have time to rig up our cameras before and in between shoots. Honestly, when I started looking for lenses to replace our Tamron lens, I didn't even know this lens existed, since Canon makes 35mm lenses that are much more expensive than this one. This lens checks off all the boxes we were looking for. It has a nice wide-angle lens and image stabilization. It does only have an f2 aperture, which is a little lower compared to the Tamron we had, but you can't really tell that much of a difference. I'll tell you that with this lens, it is a little soft compared to some of the other lenses, so if you want a really sharp picture, you may need to add a sharpening filter in editing or in camera. Now this lens is a little bit expensive, starting around $600 new, but we actually picked it up used for around $400. The only problem we found with getting one used is that a lot of people must really like this lens if they own it, because we really didn't see a lot pop up for sale online. Now I know a lot of people that use the Sigma 18-35 f1.8 lens, and we actually did use that for a little while, but as you know, image stabilization is really important to the workflow that we do, and so we had to end up getting rid of it. But it does get a really great picture. And now let's talk about our Canon 24-105mm f4 lens. Now this is the lens that's been with me for the longest, and I have thought about selling it, but then I just remember the versatility that this lens has. Now I didn't buy this lens outright because I actually got the kit with the C100, and this came in the kit. But we've used this lens on pretty much all of our cameras, including our C200. The best part of this lens is pretty much the versatility. Since it has such a long zoom range, we usually use it in cases we might only be able to bring one lens with us. It has a decently sharp image, and you can get some good bokeh if you zoom in enough. It also has image stabilization, which you know by now is a big plus for us. The only real downside with this lens is that it has an f4 aperture. I don't really mind the lack of bokeh with this lens at its widest and fastest, but really the only thing I don't like about the f4 aperture is that you really need to turn up your ISO a little bit or your exposure on your camera to get a decently lit image. For instance, we have a lot of lights in our studio, and we still have to turn the ISO on our Canon C200 past its native ISO to be able to get a good image. So this is definitely the most expensive lens we have at around $900 new, but if you do a little bit of looking around, you can find it for about $400 used. Now I love this lens, but if you're gonna be picking one of these up brand new, then Canon actually offers a version 2 of this lens, which is a little bit sharper, works a little better with the new cameras, so for another $100 or so, I would probably pick up the version 2 of this lens instead. Now you may be wondering which of these I like best and which one I use the most, but like I said before, these actually have all of their best use cases for kind of different scenarios. But if I have to choose one, I would probably say that we use the 35mm the most. Mainly for the picture quality that we get, along with it being a pretty wide angle lens with image stabilization. And if you might be wondering what lens we're actually filming on right now, we're actually filming on the Canon 24mm f2.8 pancake lens. The only reason we don't have it included in this list is because we only use it on our behind the scenes camera. Thanks for watching, and if you have any of these lenses, or you have any questions about these lenses, or you maybe want to recommend your favorite lens, let me know what you think, and I'll see you on the next one.